Hello, everyone. Good day. Welcome to our webinar presented by the National Council on Severe Autism on Special Needs Benefits, a National Perspective. My name is Ssdi Al-Maliti. I'm the Vice President of NCSA. Before I introduce Steve, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. This is going to be recorded, so if at any time you need to get up, go to the restroom, or leave early, it will be recorded. Tomorrow you will get sent the link to access the recording along with all the materials that Stephen is going to present, because everybody wants the materials. Steve's going to talk for about 40 minutes and do a presentation. Then after that, we're going to do some Q&A. If you look at your dashboard, you'll see a place where you can post your questions. Go ahead and write any questions that come up. I will be monitoring them and then presenting them to Steve at the end. Also, I wanted to, at the end, also before we do questions, maybe talk to Steve about how we can do some constructive advocacy on our community, because we all really need it. So we're going to get started. And I just wanted to introduce Steve Dale. I've known him for a very, very long time. He's a well-recognized and respected disability advocate. He spends a lot of his time learning about this stuff, going to conferences, and he's written books on it too. So without further ado, Steve, take it away.
Ssdi, thank you so much. And by the way, I especially am glad I'm talking to this group. This is a group that's near and dear to me. So as we plow through this here, by the way, when you post your questions, if you can tell me which state you're in, that may help as well, since we're doing this from a national perspective. I am from California here, and so once again, very familiar with California, but I do my best to keep up with what's going on with other states as well. A couple of things as we go through this, and here, as far as the materials are concerned, okay, they will be posted. Some of them may actually be posted during the presentation, but you can find them at www.dalelawfirm.com, and then you'll notice there's something that says event resources. Click that, you'll find all sorts of different goodies here. And for those of you that are watching this live, there will probably be more things that'll be added by tomorrow. I want to make sure that folks have as many resources as they can as we go through this. A little bit about myself just for a moment, because we have so much to cover. You know, this is information about myself, but just to give you a little more background here about where I'm coming from. On top of all of this, I was actually a psych nurse for 17 years. I worked in institutions in California. I was the president of the Union for Sonoma Developmental Center, which is now closed down, as it should be. Here, I come from 3 generations of psych nurses that worked in institutions. And in fact, for a very short time, I worked in the Northern California Autism Program. In the early 1970s, we had 100 patients, and we were told that was the entire Northern California population. Isn't that fascinating? So, I mean, things certainly have changed, and of course, there's something wrong with that. The only reason I bring that up is that, and we're going to talk about this a bit, because really I want to talk about benefits, but I want to put this in perspective. I've been arguably involved in disability related policy programs for probably 50 years. Actually, with my family, I actually grew up part of my life on the grounds of a state hospital. And I look at myself as the Forrest Gump of disability here. So I've seen a lot of changes over a long time. And I think we're going to see more changes. So this is an ever-changing area as we go through this. So let me just set this, and then we're going to jump right into the benefits. For many of you, in fact, for most of you, this is not going to be difficult at all. Imagine that you have a 17-year-old daughter, could be a son, who has a significant disability. Now, as we all know, if we've met one person with autism, we have met one person with autism, okay? But the thing with it here is that, of course, they're all individuals. But let's just determine that that Kathy is likely to need some level of assistance for the rest of her life. So you come to the estate planning attorney to provide for her needs. You set up a special needs trust, and you do all this stuff. And let's say she's otherwise healthy and likely to live for 70 years or longer. To my knowledge, and Feda, you can correct me later, but I don't think anybody's ever died of autism here. And so this is a long range.
Not yet. I haven't heard that.
Yeah. So here's the thing that comes up over her lifetime. Let's say we're in San Francisco, and Feda, you can back me up on this. Let's say the parents are hit by a bus, which is very possible in San Francisco, so be really careful here. And let's say nobody ever dies in our office. Let's say their trust matures. Well, what are the challenges we're going to have over the next 70 years of managing this? First off, I'm going to go through public benefits as they are today in 2020. Okay, so how many of you think the benefit laws will stay the same for the next 70 years? And I'm here to tell you they're gonna change. Service systems will change, and they are changing. As we start talking about advocacy, you know, we're seeing that COVID was like throwing gasoline on a fire that's been smoldering for some time while we watch our services, not just benefits, but our direct services being challenged and all that. Her condition may change. Her advocacy system may change. For most of you, you are your child's advocate. So the big thing is who's going to carry that forward. Attitudes certainly have changed about autism over the years here. The amount of resources she's going to need is going to change because there's so many factors. How could you possibly figure out what her needs are? Trustee options will change. And so here's the point as we go through this here is that this is all up-to-date information, but we are going to see more changes. And as we go through this, it's advocacy that has gotten us where we are, and we need your advocacy more than ever before. So let's get down to what we're supposed to be talking about, public benefits here. So first off, and I want to tell you, I'm considered a national expert, and just between you and I don't think there's a day that there isn't a benefits issue that comes up that doesn't confuse the hell out of me here. So anyway, when you're looking at your benefits and that kind of thing, this is a really good time to really double check what you're getting. We're going to talk about SSI versus Ssdi. So when somebody says they're getting Social Security, that just really doesn't tell us a whole lot. Medicaid services may not be apparent. There's a lot of folks that may be getting Medicaid under a waiver and they just don't really realize it. The amount of cash benefits you receive may help identify what your programs are on. So if you're not sure, you can always get a benefits verification letter by going to ssa.gov. So let's jump into the meat of this. There are two types of benefits we're talking about when we're talking about, you know, some of these key benefits we're talking about. So we're going to focus a lot on the needs-based benefits, and that's going to be things like Social Security Disability Income or SSI, Medicaid, food stamps, which today we call SNAP, legal aid, utility payment, that kind of thing, housing subsidies, things like HUD and Section 8. Now, what's common with those programs is you have to show a need based on disability, but you also have to show limited income and resources, okay? On the other side of the equation are what are called the entitlements, and we're going to spend a modest amount of time on that. And that is going to be things like Social Security Disability Insurance and on the three different programs that come under that program, Medicare and special education. Theoretically for that, you just need to show a need based on disability, but your income and resources should make no difference, okay? So another way to look at that as we go through this is that our cash program under needs-based benefits is SSI or Supplemental Security Income. And in most states, and as we're going to cover, not all, but in most states, once you get SSI, you also get Medicaid, or we call it Medi-Cal in California because we got to be different. Okay, on the entitlement side, our main program is Social Security Disability Insurance under these three different programs, which we're going to focus a lot on the CDB or Childhood Disability Benefits Program. And tied to that is Medicare. Since they're Based on entitlement, all you have to show is that you have a need based on disability here, but your unearned income will not affect those programs. We'll learn later about what earned income does. So what is SSI here? So SSI is a federal program administered by the Social Security Administration here and the states, and it provides cash for people with disabilities and the elderly, which are folks over the age of 65 that have very low income. It's intended to pay for food, clothing we don't count any longer, and shelter, and nothing more, okay? And for $783 a month, for most of you, you're supposed to pay for your food, clothing, and shelter, which is pretty difficult, okay? Once again, we'll go about the shelter thing in a minute and how that's been removed, but why that's relevant. And if you're a couple then on benefits, then the total amount you would get is $1,175. Okay. Now, for instance, in California, we have a state supplement, so we actually get $943.72. But once again, it's not an adequate amount of funds here. It's been this way for years. In order to qualify, there's a 3-part test. So the first part test is you have to be either disabled or elderly, okay? The second test is an income test, and the third test is a resource test. So let's begin. Now, under Social Security's definition of disability, here, having a diagnosis of autism gets you in the door, but that actually doesn't necessarily get you benefits. For many of you here, it may be apparent, and there may not be a lot of investigation into this, but a benefits recipient must be a person who is either 65 or older, or someone who is not able to engage in what's called substantial gainful activity, or SGA, because of a medically determinable physical or mental impairment that's expected to last a year or longer or end in death. And what that actually means is that it's based on whether or not Social Security determines whether or not the benefits recipient is able to earn more than $1,260 a month. Okay, so if you're able to earn more than $1,260 a month, you're not considered disabled. So there is that functional test, okay? The SGA amount for blind individuals is $2,110, and you might ask yourself why? And the reason is quite simple. It has to do with advocacy. When they put these rules together, the lobbyists had, for the blind or visually impaired, had better lobbyists than the rest of us did, and they got a higher amount. And that's how it happened. So the first test is, are you disabled? The second test is the income test that determines, your income and how much you're going to receive. So there's 3 kinds of income that we're dealing with. The first kind of income is what's called unearned income. And that's basically any cash or payments from annuities or pensions or alimony or support payments, interest, rents, gifts, wherever you get it. It reduces your benefits dollar for dollar for any cash or a cash equivalent given to the benefits recipient after the first $20. The $20 is called a disregard, and you only get one $20 disregard a month. So here would be an example. I actually have a niece here who's on public benefits, and let's just say instead of doing the special needs trust or enable account or some things we may be talking about, I decide I'm going to buy an annuity, and I'm going to make sure that she gets a check once a month for $100. Okay, and she is on SSI. Here's what's going to happen. They won't count the first $20, but they will reduce her benefits by $80 a month every month. So one of the things that for folks that are on SSI is it's very difficult to give them cash. Here's the second kind of income. Let's say my niece works in the month of August, and let's say she earns $265. If you earn it, you lose $1 for every $2 you earn after the first $65. So if she earned $265, her benefits would be reduced by $100. The third kind of income, which we're going to spend a little bit more time on, and it's one of the most perplexing things, and I've got to say one of the stupider things here when it comes to public benefits, is what's called in-kind support and maintenance. And what this has to do with is the federal portion of the SSI is literally 1/3 for food, 1/3 for shelter, and 1/3 for clothing, even though they stopped counting the clothing in 2005. But if you keep that in mind, this will start making some sense. So basically, as we're going to see, if somebody else covers their shelter items, which they plug it all together, what'll happen is that their benefits will be reduced dollar for dollar for the assistance you give them, capped at 1/3 of the federal benefit rate plus $20, which this year is $281. Now, in most years, although this is not a normal year, we're doing this in 2020, you're right in the middle, or we hope it's in the middle or towards the end of the COVID crisis here. There may not be a cost of living adjustment, but usually there's a slight cost of living adjustment that will change every year. Let's go through the food and shelter thing. And those of you that follow all the way through the ABLE part of this, I'm going to show some of you how to save $3,000 a year here to avoid this problem. And by the way, you don't even need an attorney. Isn't that sad here? But I'm going to show you how to do it. So for some of you, this will really pay off. Payment for food and shelter from a source other than the benefits recipient will reduce the recipient's SSI dollar. It's capped at what's called the presumed maximum value, which this year is $281, which I've already explained to you. Now, what do they count as food and shelter? That's things like food, mortgage, real property taxes, rent, heating, fuel, gas, electricity, water, fuel, and garbage removal. Those are the things that they count. So here would be the situation. Let's say you have a child that's on SSI, and we're only talking about people on SSI. And let's say you say to your child, you live in my house and you eat my food here, and I'm not going to charge you rent. Then Social Security says, cool, you're covering all these things, and we're going to reduce their benefits by $281 here. And that's how these things come up. Okay, so the other thing to notice as we go through this is what's not on this list. Things like telephone, internet, improvements to the home and that sort of thing here. But once again, this is a common reduction that many people get. So you may be getting less than the federal benefit rate. And once again, I'll show you a trick where you might be able to get around this. So the third rule is the resource rule. Okay, so what is a resource? A resource is any cash or anything that can be converted into cash for support is a resource. And if your resources exceed $2,000 on the first moment of the first day of the calendar month, you lose your eligibility of benefits for that month. It's literally a snapshot taken at the beginning of the month, okay? So now there's certain things that are excluded, and I will say, I know this is true in California, it's probably true across the nation. I think the biggest issue we deal with is where will my child live? And so one of the exclusions, one of the exemptions is that a person on SSI can own a residence that they live in of any value. You can actually put them in their name. My suggestion is not to do this, to do that. There's all sorts of reasons why, even though you could, it's not a good idea. Because of time, we aren't going to be able to go into all the ins and outs, but I will mention that when you go to the resource page for the materials, And they may not be all up until tomorrow, which would be the 14th, I think that's right, of August. Here, I will have a list of videos you can look at that will, some of them will talk about housing and how you can set aside a house for a person with a disability here. And usually you want to hold it in a trust. But just getting back to this, a person on SSI can own a residence that they live in of any value. Okay, in that home, they can own all the household items that they like. Okay, so that could include big screen TV sets, couches, that sort of thing. Clothes stopped being counted as a resource in 2005, so they can have all the clothing that they wish, and they can also have items. But if they're holding items for their intrinsic value, that's going to be a problem. So you can't hold gold bars and count them as, as decorations. You can't hold Renoirs and that sort of thing here. But this is a pretty liberal thing. They can own an automobile of any value, which I think for this group, that's not going to happen a ton. They can own any items related to the disability. That kind of makes sense. This one's kind of an odd one. What we're talking about is what the benefits recipient can own, not what the parents own. I know a lot of parents oftentimes will fund their trusts by buying life insurance on their lives and leaving it to the special needs trust. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what the benefits recipient can own. So they can own a life insurance policy with a cash surrender value no greater than $1,500. Now, if there's any financial advisors in the room, you're probably scratching your head and going, how could you do this? These things are horribly out of date here. Where do these come up? Gerber baby life insurance policies. They come up more than anything else. We don't see those much anymore, but it was really common, 10, 15 years ago for people to buy these cheap policies, which turned out to be a royal headache in the end. They can own any amount of term insurance because it has no value until they pass away. This one's kind of interesting. They can own a burial plot or a burial space or a crypt of any value, but they can only set aside $1,500 of their own money to get into that space. By the way, all kidding aside, taking care of these issues is really an important thing to do. So all that. So part of that is with the SSI. In most states, but as we're going to see, not all, if you get $1 of SSI, you also qualify for Medicaid or Medicaid in California. Now, when you look at the value of the benefits, the SSI obviously has a value, but in many cases, whereas the loss of the SSI is a nuisance, in some cases, the loss of the Medicaid can really be a tragedy. In some cases, the Medicaid is a huge value. In some cases, not that big. It really depends on the individual. And I do want to mention that if you do lose your SSI, and we're going to cover this later, there are other ways of qualifying for Medicaid. And this is where sometimes having an advisor or somebody who can help you work through all these crazy rules can really be helpful. Now, there are 9 states that are not what are called categorically eligible, and those are Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and Virginia. I believe, but I could be wrong, but I believe that Illinois is moving towards categorical eligibility, so these things change. So the rules in those states is that you might have to make a separate application to your Medicaid office, but Medicaid is not allowed to make rules that are any more stringent than SSI. For the rest of us, once you qualify for the SSI, and as we're going to see later when we get to CDB here, if you were qualified for SSI, you're going to get your Medicaid automatically. And in a lot of cases, for some folks I deal with, the loss of the Medicaid is just unthinkable. By the way, getting back to the advocacy, this is one of the things that's up for many changes and could cause chaos here. And this is why advocacy is so important. With the Medicaid programs, they're federally funded programs administered by the states. The program's eligibility criteria and availability services vary from state to state. It's important that you familiarize yourself with those programs in your state, but each state has to provide these items: inpatient hospital services, outpatient hospital services, home health services, and in California, that's our in-home support services program. I think something that's pretty important program, even though it's horribly inadequate. Physician services, laboratory and x-ray services, transportation to medical care, and long-term nursing care, including long-term facilities for folks that have IDD. With home care services, the states offer some level to assist persons that are qualified for Medicaid. So like if you are qualified in California for in-home support services, a lot of people don't realize that's Medi-Cal or Medicaid. So the rules are exactly the same and you have to adhere for this. So anyway, it's supposed to, the idea is for folks to safely remain in their homes and to avoid long-term care. These services include personal services, domestic services, field preparation, meal preparation, laundry, shopping, that sort of thing here. It also could have include home access or modification services. That's something anyway you need to check with your states for the specifics for these programs. The fact is that many programs really are Medicaid based. Let's move over to our first entitlement, okay? And especially since we're dealing with folks with severe autism, I'm gonna guess that there's many, many, many of you where this is gonna be really important, okay? And by the way, we intend to put in some materials from a great advocate that's gonna help folks kind of wade through this program. Social Security Disability Insurance is a national program for injured workers that have the requisite number of work credits in the Social Security system. So if you've gotten in your 40 quarters, and let's say you are in an accident and it leaves you disabled, with the definition being your inability to earn substantial gainful activity for a year or longer, same definition here, you may be qualified for SSDI. Or if you have a person with a disability who got in the requisite quarters for their program, they may eventually get qualified for SSDI. Now, SSDI here, Social Security Disability Insurance, actually is a big umbrella for 3 programs. I'm covering just the basic SSDI program here, but the one that's most important is coming up, which is Childhood Disability Benefits. SSDI has no income or resource limits, so you could win the lottery. It's not going to affect it. But but earned income may cause a period of ineligibility here for benefits, because remember, disability is not just merely having a diagnosis. There's a functional test that goes with this, which is the substantial gainful activity test. Later, I'm going to show you a resource that really digs deeper into this. So for those of you where this may be an issue, if you have a loved one that's working, but those are the basic rules. This is the part that's really important. An adult disabled child may be eligible for Social Security benefits if a parent is deceased or is receiving some form of Social Security here, and that could include Social Security disability, and the child was disabled before the age of 22. Now, for this group, by definition, you must have been disabled before the age of 18, so this should not be hard for this group. And the child has never been substantially gainfully employed here. And there is a marriage penalty with this as well. So once again, we're going to I know we always get a lot of questions about childhood disability benefits, and I'm going to provide you with as many resources as I can. Benefits are not payable until the parent dies, retires, or becomes disabled themselves, once again, being themselves qualified for some form of Social Security disability. So let's go through some examples and even do a little bit of math. Okay, so upon the disability or retirement of a parent, the child will receive an amount equal to 1/2 of the parent's benefit. So for those of you that get these letters from Social Security from time to time that says, hey, if we don't go broke, you know, when you retire, this is what we expect that you're going to be getting from Social Security. Take that number and cut it in half, and that's what your child will start receiving. Upon the death of the parent, the child will receive an amount equal to 3/4 of the parent's benefit. Okay, and let me just anticipate a question. You don't get to aggregate this. So if you have two parents here, the benefits recipient gets whatever amount will get them the largest amount. You don't get to add them together here. And so, and I will mention, if you're in a situation where maybe a parent just abandoned the child, which unfortunately happens all the time, this is not a gift from the parent. This is an entitlement. So when that parent dies, becomes disabled here, or retires, your child may be qualified for these benefits. So here's an example. Helen's been disabled from birth and is receiving $783 in SSI. Helen's father, Earl, retires and receives $1,400 a month. Helen begins to receive Social Security retirement for $700 a month, 1/2 of $1,400. So what's that going to do to the SSI? Well, first off, it's not earned income. So since it's unearned income, they disregard the first 20 bucks here, and they're going to reduce the SSI by $680, which that means, assuming I did the math right, and you guys should go and double check me, because, you know, here is that she's going to get $103 of SSI and $700 of childhood disability benefits. Now you might look at that and go, well, what's the big deal? We're only 20 bucks ahead. And I'm going to show you there is a real benefit that's going to come up. Let's go to the next example. Let's say Earl dies. Although in our office, nobody dies, they're trust mature. But let's say he dies, and Helen begins to receive $1,050 a month, 3/4 of that amount in childhood disability benefits. Well, now the math is really easy. We just subtract it out, and the SSI is completely eliminated. By the way, this is a good thing, okay? Depending on where you live here, they do a lot of scrutiny for people that are on SSI, and folks on childhood disability, you just don't have the same restrictions and the same amount of scrutiny. She still maintains her Medicaid, but she will qualify eventually for Medicare. She'll be what's called Medi-Medi. Okay, now here's the thing with it here, and we will also post here what's called a POMS site. It's actually regulations that eligibility workers use, because it's a real common mistake that in this situation, they'll go ahead and drop somebody off the Medicaid even though they're not supposed to. And what we will put up there are the regulations that you can take into your Social Security office if it turns out that your child was dropped off of Medicaid and they shouldn't have been. If a child loses their SSI because of benefits that or an increase because of the receipt of childhood disability benefits, or the increase of the childhood disability benefits because there is a cost of living adjustment, the child still is supposed to retain SSI linked Medicaid. Now, if they lost it because of an increase, it's because of what's called the Pickle Amendment. So that's why we've got the pickle there. But once again, there is a companion regulation that's fortunately in the same document that explains to the eligibility workers why you're supposed to keep your Medicaid. So last program is Medicare. Medicare is a federal health program for people that are over 65, or people that are under 65 have been receiving Social Security based on a disability for 2 or more years. This is the benefit for Helen here, is that she's going to become Medi-Medi. Okay, Medicare is not means tested. It's really hard to goof up the Medicare, bordering on impossible here. You can be eligible for both programs. If you are Medi-Medi, the Medicare pays for the copay, the Part B, the Part C, the Part D, and all of that stuff. here. So usually trying to maintain both programs is desirable. No player on the block, ABLE accounts. And I've done a lot on ABLE accounts, and we'll go back to this. And I think I have something like 10 hours of videos on the ABLE account. So in the materials that you'll find here that will be on our website here, we'll post a link to some of the videos we've done on ABLE. By the way, and maybe we'll ask Jill and Fada if they can put that out. There's I just did something with the National ABLE Resource Center that's going to be released soon, and also we'll be doing a webinar for Californians with CalABLE next week. Let's go through this. An ABLE account can be open. An ABLE account, what is this thing? This is something that was passed in 2017, I believe, here. I was fortunate to be involved on the sidelines with this, so I was actually involved with this long before. It's an important piece of legislation, but often misunderstood. An ABLE account is basically, it's an account. Technically, it's a form of a 529 plan. It has some similarities, but not a lot. And it's basically a way that funds can be held for a person with a disability without interfering with their benefits. We're going to get deeper into this in a minute, and I think this is important for this community, that it can be opened by the beneficiary themselves or the person with a disability if they have the capacity to contract. Okay, and I think a lot of folks that are watching this, that's going to be a challenge. Or it can be set up by a guardian, a parent here, or an agent under a valid power of attorney, but that would assume that your child has the capacity to enter into a contract. Okay, the beneficiary must have been disabled before the age of 26. That's not going to be a problem with this group. And it can be open in any state with an active ABLE program. So your state may have one, but you're more than welcome to use other states if for some reason you need to. We've helped folks open up ABLE programs in many states. Our favored program is the Ohio program, but many states have also very fine programs. An individual can only have one ABLE account, and if an individual has multiple accounts, once again, it's just going to cause no end of problems. And where would that happen? You may have something where, like in my case, I worked with someone to help open up an ABLE account here for a mother, and lo and behold, dad, who had been separated, opened up one at one time. You have a short amount of time to straighten out what happens with the second account here, and that can be really confusing. Any funds in the subsequent account will be considered an available resource. So if you're doing this, and there's other folks who might be opening an account, remember it has to be opened up by the disabled individual themselves, a parent, or a guardian or conservator, or under a power of attorney. So if you have a situation where somebody on that list might also be opening up an account, you need to coordinate with them. Contributions are limited to whatever the federal gift tax exclusion is, which is currently $15,000 a year. Okay, now that's a really low number, and the reason that that number is so low is that they had to keep the number low in order to meet federal guidelines. But this is an area where we really should be looking to advocate to raise that. The maximum aggregate that you can put into an ABLE account is whatever that state's 529 plan amount is. So for instance, if you were opening this up in California, they've made it really easy to remember, because the most you can put in a normal 529 plan in California is $529,000. Here, I doubt if I'll ever see something, a $529,000 ABLE account here. Your state may have a different number. I will tell you, for most of the folks we work with who are dealing with somebody who has a severe disability, here, a lot of these accounts we use as money in, money out accounts. But once again, you can learn more of that on some of the videos I've done on this. What can an ABLE account be used for? And I'm not going to read through all of this here, and I'm not 100% sure that these rules will stick, but they probably will. if you were to look at the ABLE loss, there's a thing called the Qualified Disability Expense, or a QDE. And there's a whole long list that you can use it for education, housing, transportation, this, that, and the other thing. And there were some limitations. And there was some dictum in a report put out by the Secretary of the Treasury. This is run by the IRS, of all things, here. And they said that it could also be used for anything that helps their day-to-day needs. Well, that just opened the door. You can basically use an ABLE account for almost anything. The proposed regulations have, once again, expanded the qualified disability expense to include basic living expenses. Once again, there's an argument that that's incorrect, but I don't think that's going to change. So you can really use it broadly. Social Security regulations have been put out that say that the Social Security and CMS, which oversees Medicaid, and HUD, that oversees HUD, their regulations say that you cannot consider distributions for housing to count against their public benefits if you run the funds through an ABLE account. And I'm going to go through an example in a minute. So there is a payback upon the death of the benefits recipient for an ABLE account. For normal Medicaid recovery, Medicaid recovery is for any Medicaid that was used after the age of 65 here. And this would include in many states, but in California, of course, we don't believe in following federal rules. We've changed this. That would include any residence in the name of the Medicaid recipient, which is one of the reasons I usually suggest do not put the house in the name of your child with a disability here. So in an ABLE account, the lien is for any Medicaid used after the creation of the ABLE account. And if you set up a third-party trust, which is just your normal estate planning special needs trust, there is no lien because, well, they never owned it. Okay, you really should look at your own state. And some states like Oregon, Pennsylvania, California, and I think there's another state now that has legislated against the Medicaid lien. Here in your state, there may be an exception if you use that program, but for most folks with ABLE accounts, there is a lien upon death for the Medicaid. Let's talk about signature authority. I think that's especially important with this group here. So here, yes.
Sorry. So I just wanted to know if we could do it, maybe wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so we can take some questions, because I have.
I'll do that, and then what I will do is I won't go through the SNAP because I think that's self-explanatory. So let me plow through this, and I'm happy to run through the questions.
No worries.
Okay, let's just go through this real quick. Okay, so the folks who can have signature authority are is the person themselves, the disabled individual, an agent under a power of attorney, his or her parent or legal guardian or conservator. Now, unless the ABLE beneficiary lacks capacity, they should have somebody, they should delegate this to with the power of attorney, but I'm going to assume that most of the folks here don't have the capacity to do that. So let's run through this scenario real quick. Fred and Wilma have a daughter named Pebbles who's been born with a severe developmental disability. Fred and Wilma establish an ABLE account under their authority as the parents. Pebble lacks capacity to manage her own account or execute a power of attorney. Fred and Wilma maintain signature authority over the account as parents. Pretty straightforward. Fred and Wilma passed away in a tragic accident, and their neighbors and best friends, Barney and Betty Rubble, step in to take care of Pebbles. In order for Barney and Bebble to assume signature authority, they would either have to adopt Pebbles or become her guardian or conservator. So here's the thing. If you're, and I'm going to skip this slide, if you're looking at setting up an ABLE account and you're looking at putting substantial funds in it, you need to really think about who's going to be able to manage that if you're setting that up as the parent after you pass away. Here's the last thing, and let's open it up for questions. But this is something that for some of you here, you'll be able to save up to $3,000 a year. So I think it's worth going through. Social Security Administration basically has declared that an ABLE account, funds that are paid through an ABLE account do not count against their benefits, whether they're for housing or other items, with some very limited exceptions. And also that Social Security is not allowed to review what the expenditures are for. And also that the assets in the ABLE account belong to the disabled individual. And that's where the magic's going to happen. So here's the deal. Let's say that Belinda has been disabled from birth and is receiving $783 a month in SSI. A majority of her expenditures are for housing and utility payments. She'd like to move to a nicer apartment that would cost $1,000 a month, which would be really difficult at $783 a month. She's going to need some assistance to make this happen. So if Belinda's parents were to give her $1,000 a month, going over what we learned about income, that's not going to work because that's unearned income, and then that'll just wipe out the SSI completely. If she were to pay the landlord directly, well, we're getting closer because the reduction would only be $281 a month. If instead she were to contribute the money into the ABLE account, and then the ABLE account paid the landlord, there would be no reduction in benefits, because in this case, Belinda's rent was paid with her own money, because the instant the money went into the account, it became Belinda's money, and she paid her housing with her own money. Just here, you can tie it to a special needs trust, and that's probably, a very good way to go. Two things to mention real quick, and I'm going to skip the SNAP part. Two resources that are really kind of cool here, and we'll make sure you have that. For information more about benefits, disabilitybenefits101.org, great website, especially if you're in any of these states here. And if you're looking for an attorney that really focuses on working with folks with disabilities, I highly recommend the Special Needs Alliance. I know there's other groups and all that, but the Special Needs Alliance here is an invitation-only group. And once again, there's a screening that happens to make sure that the folks that are in the group aren't doing this incidental, that they make this a big part of that. Veda, let's go to the most terrifying part of the presentation for me. Do we have any questions?
We have a lot of questions.
Okay.
But the main question that I keep getting asked is, are they going to get copies of this presentation?
That they are. And Amy,
yes.
by the way, so you are going to get copies of this presentation and a whole bunch of stuff. So if you go to www.dalelawfirm.com, here, Amy will be placing these where the arrow says, where it says event resources. And it'll be more than this presentation. There'll be lots of other stuff.
Okay, so another question that oh, look, someone wrote, this was a great presentation. I could listen to Steve all day. That's very nice.
If you really want to, my understanding is that we have over 90 hours of presentations on the YouTube channel. And I think I just had somebody who told me they watched them all. I mean, Fada, of course you've watched everything I've ever put out, haven't you? Or no?
Well, that goes without saying.
Yeah, it's not the same. Okay.
We'll send out, maybe we can send out a link to your YouTube channel as well.
That would be great.
For your archived. Okay, here we go. So here's another question about ABLE account versus special needs trust. What's the difference in term of restrictions?
Okay. And once again, this is where, God, we could do a whole thing on ABLE, and this is why the videos are so important here. And just one last plug, I am going to be doing something next Wednesday here, and we'll make sure for Californians that you have that link with CalABLE. Okay, they're kind of entirely different animals in many ways. A special needs trust, and I'm going to talk about estate planning trust, not money in what's called a first party trust. Here, but let's just limit this to estate planning trust. So if you set up a special needs trust and you fund it here, and the trust a third-party trust, an estate planning trust, can be used for virtually anything, but usually it's going to have restrictions that basically say that if the person's on SSI, you have to be careful about paying for food and shelter. Just functionally, the limitations on that trust is that you still can't give somebody cash. And the biggest limitation is that every distribution from that trust has to be scrutinized by the beneficiary. So in many ways, being a disability advocate, we're always trying to enable folks with disabilities to have as much control over their lives as they can. A special needs trust is a form of a spendthrift trust where the trustee has absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none. This is one of the reasons why when you're setting up a special needs trust, having some checks and balance system here, maybe with trust protectors or advisory committees or whatever, are really important. For the ABLE account, once again, it does have a payback, although I will tell you, most of the accounts we've set up are what I call money in, money out accounts. They're accounts where the money goes in and gets spent immediately, but you can use it for saving here. What are the advantages of that? One is, let me give you an example. I have a niece here who we set up an ABLE account for, and she's on SSI, and she's technically competent, I would say very challenged, and she's never spent a single cent in her entire life. She's been on SSI her entire life, and all that. We set up the ABLE account for her, and so now family members are able to make gifts to it and that kind of thing. But the most important thing we're using for her is that we're using the ABLE account to teach her financial literacy. And I will tell you, the first things she purchased were ridiculous, and now we're down to questionable. But how is somebody with a disability going to learn how to manage their funds or make expenditures when they've never done that? So it's great for teaching financial literacy. It's great for small gifts and that kind of thing. It's also what the law says, what Social Security, CMS, and HUD says is that it's not to be scrutinized by those different agencies. And so you can use it for almost anything. And if there is a penalty, it would be by the IRS, and the penalty is so laughable, I would never tell you not to follow the law, but on the other hand, if you don't follow the rules, there's very little penalty involved in it. The housing thing is huge, okay? For those of you that are taking the $281 reduction in benefits, and Fada, here's the only problem. I should be able to, as an attorney, to make 30% on this, but there's no way to bill our viewers here. If you follow the example of Belinda, and also with the link to the YouTube channel, there's video specifically on this here. For housing, you can use that and it won't interfere with HUD, and you will not get the $281 reduction in benefits. I'll tell you what I'm seeing more and more. I've seen special needs trusts tied to ABLE accounts, especially for those that are more severely impaired here. And we use it for housing, we use it for financial literacy here, and that sort of thing. Also, when you're looking at using an ABLE account, depending on what you're doing, how you're going to access the funds may be important. So once again, when you're looking, I know a lot of people focus on what's the cheapest account and that kind of thing. That's not my focus. In many cases, if having something that is tied to a debit card, so the Ohio program is tied to a debit card, California has a debit card, look at it and ask yourself, how is my loved one, if they're going to access this, or even for yourself, how are you going to access these funds? And a debit card is pretty important. I could go on and on, but I know.
Okay, well, here's another question. Can a special needs trust pay into an ABLE account? Can the special needs trust pay into an ABLE account from the special needs funds for the beneficiary in order to decrease SSI benefits? Did that make sense?
In order to increase, yes. Yeah, so let's go to our example with Belinda. Now, we could do this with Belinda in a couple of different ways. You could just plop $15,000 in it, and it could come from a special needs trust. both a self-settled and an estate planning trust. If it's a self-settled trust, which I'm purposely trying to avoid because it just adds to the confusion, but this would be if the money went in there from a personal injury settlement. You really want to talk to your attorney about this. But more and more, I'm seeing not one or the other. I'm seeing families setting up both. The ABLE account has a lot of advantages here. It has its limitations. The special needs trust, once again, has a lot of advantages here. And oddly enough, for tax purposes, it has a lot more advantages than the ABLE account here. But you put the two things together, you really do get the best of both worlds. And as we go back to my niece, I love her dearly. I would never put $15,000 in that account for fear of what might happen. So we put in $200 or $300 at a time. We monitor what she's doing, and she uses the Ohio program, which is tied to what's called a TrueLink card, so we can track the expenditures. And that's how we're teaching her financial literacy. So there's so many advantages of it. Once again, for our viewers out there on a national level, the National ABLE Resource Center will be releasing a podcast soon of me about tying a special needs trust to an ABLE account. And next Wednesday, I will be doing the same thing about how you would put the two together for California. For me, it's not one or the other. For more and more families, it's both.
Well, here's a follow-up. What do you particularly like about the Ohio ABLE program? I guess we have a few people.
And keep this in mind, I'm sure you can relate to this. You know, we tend to be very California oriented, but you know, we have to remember there are good things that actually do happen. I'm going to even in Ohio, I shouldn't have said that. So, but anyway, Ohio's the thing that I do like about Ohio, and it doesn't mean the other programs aren't good, and they actually administer, the last time I saw, 8 other states, is that there is the access to their card. Because here's the thing, both as the trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust and as an advisor over thousands of special needs trusts here, that card is absolutely essential. And the fact that it's tied to what's called a TrueLink card gives us greater ability to track what's going on, especially if we have a vulnerable individual. That doesn't mean that the other programs aren't terrific. By the way, the Cal ABLE program here has its own debit card. I'm trying to get more used to it. So once again, that doesn't mean in California we shouldn't use Cal ABLE, especially if Dante's watching. So Dante, I love you, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Dante's the executive director of Cal ABLE.
Yeah, Dante's great.
And a great guy and a great advocate.
He is, he truly is. So here's a question. Is an adult child who is married eligible for Ssdi after his parents die?
This is something that it gets really complicated. And so here's something to look at, because if you have somebody who is on childhood disability benefits and marries somebody who is not on benefits, there is a marriage penalty. It is disgusting, it is sad, and there is. Now, a great place to find an article on this, okay, because the specifics of it, and I can't give you a rational reason why, but if you go to specialneedsalliance.org, okay, specialneedsalliance.org, and you might note it, well, if you open it, it'll have something that, a link that will go to some of their different articles, and I'll try to have Amy put that in to do a PDF and put that in the bucket as well. There is an article called "What If My Disabled Child Marries?" or something along that line. So if you were to put in marriage or whatever, it's going to pop up. It's a great article. And you know, the sad thing is, I've had a number of situations where instead of getting married, they had to do a commitment ceremony. And you know, the thing is, that's one of the number of things I wish they would take away, because why shouldn't a person with disabilities be able to marry whoever they want? But the problem is that they're really dependent on the Medicaid, for instance, for attendant care and that kind of thing. You know, we can run into all sorts of problems and a loss of their benefits and all of that. So.
Okay, here's another question. What about a person who's 45 years old but has a pension? What happens to SSI eligibility?
Okay, so if they're getting a pension themselves, the pension will, in many cases, will cause a loss of their benefits, because what will happen is the pension funds for SSI, okay, and we're talking about SSI, it will be counted as a resource because there's no exclusion for the actual pension funds. And what they're looking at, and it depends on your pension funds. If your pension funds are like an IRA or a 401k or something you could access and cash out, even if it would be an extremely stupid thing to do, it's a resource. Now, if the pension funds only allow you to get the income, then the pension funds themselves are not a resource, it's the income. The thing with the income, if it goes directly, if the income goes to the beneficiary, and for most pension funds under ERISA, they have to here, then that's going to be income that's going to affect their SSI and their Medicaid. Let's just say for Medicaid, if that's what we're really dealing with, there's likely to be an exception in your state, and we go back to, especially if you're in one of these states that are listed on the screen. Here, if you go to disabilitybenefits101.org and click the state you're in, it will probably have the exceptions. The exceptions in California would be the working disabled program. Here would be a great exception, and there's other exceptions that go with it, and that's where DB101 is such a wonderful website. One thing further, just with pension funds, which we won't get into too deeply, but I just want to issue spot. If instead what you're looking at is leaving your pension funds, your retirement funds and IRAs or 401ks or that sort of thing, you can leave that if you irrevocably assign it to the special needs trust. But you're going to need somebody who really knows what they're doing, because the rules are really complicated, more than we could get into right now. So this is where you'd want to have somebody, not just, as far as I'm concerned, not just somebody who does special needs trust once in a while, but somebody who's dedicated themselves to this. This is where I would go to the specialneedsalliance.org, or at least, make sure that the attorney that you're working with does more than just set up trusts. Anyway, Fado.
So New York State has something called a buy-in program that allows someone to save more than $2,000. Is that correct? And are there other states like that?
You know what? And this is where I have to throw up my hands and go, I don't practice in New York. I know there's a number of things in New York where they have exceptional programs and all that. I know a lot of the programs in New York, by the way, for those of you folks that are in New York, are being looked at right now because of budget problems. So some of those programs may get changed, and they're not going to be changed to the positive. They'll be changed to the negative, which gets back to why advocacy is so important. On that, if you were looking for an answer to that, then once again, you probably would want to look at a Special Needs Alliance member. I will, if you email me, and please, here, if you email me at steve@dalelawfirm.com, if you email me that question, I will forward it to a New York practitioner and see what they have to say, okay?
You just opened up a can of worms on yourself, but okay.
As I was saying that, I don't know, can we go back and I should have said Amy at dalelawfirm.com, but I already sent my email, so.
All right. So here, this is about the Pickle Amendment. I just like the way it's called. Does the Pickle Amendment apply in all states? And if maybe somebody could tell us quickly what the Pickle Amendment is, just so if people missed it.
Okay, here's what the Pickle Amendment is. By the way, it has nothing to do with a pickle. It has to do with Senator Jake Pickle from Texas, of all places, here. And what he was trying to address is cost of living increases, because you would get into situations where on their childhood disability benefits, here you would get to the point that the funds would keep going up, eventually to the point that would knock you off of Medicaid, okay? So what the Pickle Amendment is all about specifically is having to do with cost of living adjustments that drop you off of your Medicaid. And what this is all about is that if that's the reason you got dropped, then you get to keep your SSI, and you get to keep your Medicaid without a share of costs. But one of the documents we will leave is a POMS site. POMS is the Program Operation Manual System. So the way I like to describe it is when you call Social Security, it doesn't seem like they're reading a script. They're reading a script, okay? These are the directions to the eligibility workers to tell them how to figure out one thing or another. So in the POMS site, so it's gonna have something that says SI-O something or another, I didn't memorize the number. It'll have a POMS site that'll include folks that were formerly on SSI. It just below the Pickle Amendment part, it will have something for people that are on CDB, Childhood Disability Benefits, and this is going to affect many people on this webcast. And what that says is if the reason you were dropped off the Medicaid is because you went on the CDB and you're no longer getting any SSI at all, that they are to continue to keep their Medicaid as long as they're otherwise eligible. What is otherwise eligible? You still have the $2,000 resource limitation and all of that other stuff. But once again, for many people, losing the Medicaid is unthinkable here. And this will shock you, Theta, but Social Security makes lots of mistakes, and we find people all the time who've had their Medicaid or Medi-Cal dropped when they shouldn't have. That document will be a very valuable document.
Okay. Well, let's keeping on this SSI and stuff. It is a legal, not a permanent resident eligible for SSI, and will it affect their ongoing, legal residency process?
You have to be. By the way, I am in California.
You don't have to know the answer to every single thing, Steve. Okay,
I know. I was just going to say here. To me, there are nobody's here illegal. So yeah. If we have undocumented folks, which I don't think was the question,
no,
then you're going to have a problem. You have to be here, here documented of some form, okay? Here, so this is going to be fairly state specific, but for SSI itself, here, you may have an issue, but for many folks that are not U.S. citizens but are here that are documented, there are ways of getting qualified for that. The specifics of that I'm not clear on. In California, we have, and I'm blanking on the name, but we have, California has its own program that basically gives them the equivalent of the SSI and the Medicaid here. Here, if they're not otherwise eligible for SSI, here if they're residents of California, and that's a much looser program. On that, I don't have a lot of expertise in that, so I wish I did. I'm sorry.
No problem. If a disabled person is receiving SSI or Ssdi and pays rent to their parents, which they're renting a place from, who owns the home, can the parents include the person as a dependent on their tax return?
Ooh, that's a compound question. Okay, usually what it has to do with is whether or not the parent is providing 50% of their needs.
It says who own the home and provide food. So they're, I guess that's 60% or 66% of their needs because it's rent, food, and clothing, right?
Well, yeah, but there's needs beyond that. I mean, maybe they're covering therapy, maybe they're covering other things,
So if it's,
yeah,
especially if the rent is less than what they would normal rent, could they claim them as a dependent?
Still comes down to 50%, I believe.
50%. Okay, no worries.
By the way, that's the difference between, I am a tax attorney, I actually have a master's in tax. This would be something where I would say, talk to your CPA. There's nothing special about the disability part of that. It really has to do with 50%,
Well, here's a question. I think I know the answer to this, but I was like, I think I might know the answer to this. It was asking if a child has SSI, can the parent assign it to a relative? And I think the answer is yes. Whoever's the chore provider.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I know that.
Consider it is for, it is for food and shelter and all of that other stuff. And, you are accountable for that. So.
Sure, sure. Um, so oh gosh, there's so many here.
Uh,
Texas, in Texas, they have a 15-year waiting list on Social Security waivers, maybe even longer. Are there states that offer these service as soon as someone is diagnosed and passes the requirements?
There are, you'd have to go state to state. Now, California, we are what is the only state. Oh, by the way, I just got notice that the PDF of the presentation was just posted. So how's there? So getting back to this, the California, for instance, we are arguably the only state with an entitlement. So for instance, if you have IDD here and you are in California and you intend to stay here, you are entitled to services. How long that's going to continue, I don't know. Some states have crazy long lists, like Colorado here. And this is something for those of you that are moving from state to state. And in California, I think our largest export is Californians here. You really should look at that state and the waiting list and that kind of thing before you go, because some states have crazy waiting lists for everything. Some it just depends on what you're doing. Quite frankly, I don't know from state to state. In California, we do have an entitlement, so you are entitled the minute, when you are in California and your intent is to remain, so the specifics of which, this would be, once again, if you're looking to move to a specific state, this is where maybe looking at an attorney that's from the Special Needs Alliance in that state and finding out the specifics for your loved one would be an excellent place to go.
All right, here's, I'm pretty sure, a California question. How does, if a parent is the IHSS chore provider for the child who is deemed eligible for SSI, can they deny them based on the income of the parent from IHSS?
Here's one of the cool things, especially if we're dealing with a minor. There's this nasty old thing when we're dealing with a minor, that there's a thing called parental deeming. Okay, and what parental deeming is the income to the parent is deemed or attributed to the child and is counted as income. That's why in a lot of cases we don't get a lot of folks that have children on SSI, because it means the parent or the parents are really poor. They have the same resource limitations that we saw when I went through the income and resource limits. In-home support services, or which is a Medicaid program, and this is common in other states as well, does not count as income to the parent. And so that's one reason why sometimes the parent getting the IHSS can be important, because it won't interfere in parental deeming. Now we're talking about folks that are extremely poor, and this isn't to make light of it. So this isn't for normal folks. By the way, that's where the waivers came from, because there's a thing called parental deeming for Medicaid. And what the waivers are all about, the Katie Beckett waiver, the DD waiver, the institutional deeming waivers and all that, what that's all about is not counting the assets of the parents in deeming to the child, because otherwise nobody would ever be qualified for Medicaid in the services unless they were just extremely severely poor. Okay, these are not easy issues.
So here's another question. She says, it sounds like a special needs trust is very expensive to maintain by a third party. Is there a cheap way? Can I set it up myself as a parent and maintain it by myself?
Okay, let's go through a special needs trust, although as part of maintaining it's going to be a problem for you. Okay, do you have to have an attorney? No, I think there are places where you can actually buy documents, and that's what you're doing on the internet. Here, should you? Well, keep in mind, I am an attorney, so here, you really should, but see, here's the thing that comes up, and even as far as cost, from what I've seen, what you pay and what you get don't always add up. So I know folks who charge crazy amounts of money here, and I don't think their work is any better than some of the folks who charge less. Sometimes it's hard to tell from that. I'm not setting fees or whatever. We charge $2,000 in our law firm, and once again, there's no set rate, or that's one of the things, just to give you some idea. There are other ways of doing it. Now, alternatives. You can look at pooled trust, POOLED. One way to find pooled trusts is to go back to the Special Needs Alliance. And if you type in search for pooled trust, what you'll find is a list of pooled trusts. What a pooled trust is, it's kind of like a cross between a 401k and a special needs trust. You don't get your own document, but you can open up an account there. These are blessed by both state and federal law. They're all different. Like any consumer, you got to really look at it and the cost. That would be a less expensive way to go. As far as maintenance and that kind of thing, in most cases, while the parent is alive, if the parent's the grantor or the parent setting it up, usually the parent remains the trustee and they're in charge. But the issue is who's going to be the trustee after you pass away. Now, look, I've done this exclusively now for 30 years, which is considered a long time. And I know, and we could spend a lot of time on this, but we don't have it because you can pull the plug on me. So, but I have found that oftentimes the most expensive trust administration is when you make a family member the trustee of your child's trust, because these benefits rules are so wonky, they're so non-intuitive here. And the other thing you really have to think about before you make a child, your son or daughter, the trustee over their son or brother or sister's trust, is, it's kind of a natural for a sibling to be the trustee over somebody else. Now, that being said, I know some family members, siblings that have made great trustees, but really think about it before you do that here. So, I mean, that's something, as far as trying to find an inexpensive way to do it, you might be able to reduce the cost. You just have to be really careful, because sometimes the cheapest way to go may turn out to be not the least expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I heard a horror story, maybe it was you that told me, about like the $2,000 pair of sneakers.
Oh, yeah.
So a client wanted a pair of sneakers and the trustee said no, and they kept going back and forth, and it ended up costing over $2,000.
Yes.
For a pair of sneakers.
That was because of a strange thing having to do with the courts. But the problem, here's an example. We had a beneficiary, and it made perfect sense here, who did marry somebody else on SSI. So we didn't have the marriage penalty thing. And hey, Peter, you can relate to this. We're in California, right? So, I mean, you got to have a car unless you live in San Francisco here. And so, of course, now they're a couple, they've got to have 2 cars, right? Oh no, the rules under Social Security is that a couple can have 1 car. What did that cost? It cost about $60,000 in penalty by the time it was all done and over. Now, the trustee, which was a family member, used common sense. And my rule of thumb is, if you use common sense with these benefit programs, you are doomed to fail here. So this is why a lot of that, for those of you that, and once again, I'm not trying to necessarily sell trust, but if you go to our website here, we have a video, a workshop here. And a big part of what we talk about is choosing a trustee. And really, keep in mind, the trustee has sole and absolute discretion. So you've got to really keep an eye on what's going on. I like to set up a checks and balance system with a professional trustee with family that are overseeing them. Oftentimes it's trust protectors who can hire and fire. My preference is not to put the child on the front line. Really, when you're doing planning, don't think of these things as commodities. And also be careful of any attorney where the answer is always the special needs trust, because this might be shocking. The special needs trust is not always the answer, here. It's just a tool here. You really have to look at the situation. And if you're looking at a smaller amount, maybe an able account would make more sense here. Maybe there's other ways of dealing with this. And so there's already all sorts of ways to crack this.
Yeah, so this was the question too. What is the ideal architecture / setup for a severely disabled adult child that will eventually have a guardian when the parents are gone? Would it be
Okay.
able? Would it be special needs trust? I mean,
Here's how I look at it. The trust is a tool. The able account's a tool. There's a thing called the TrueLink card. It's a tool. We got all these different tools, okay? And I have to tell you, it's what I call the commoditization of disability. Here is we get too caught up in the tools or the commodities because an able account's a commodity. The states sell these things, and that's not mean that they're wrong, but we get too caught up in it. The ideal situation for me for a severely disabled person would be a special needs trust, assuming that makes sense. With that, you've got a trustee who's a fiduciary, but do they understand the day-to-day needs of a person with severe autism? And I'm going to suggest to you, it's going to be the rare trustee that does. I know for myself, because I've been involved in care of folks with disabilities arguably since I was 10 years old here. And the reason is they used to have staff members used to bring their kids to the hospital. So, I mean, I grew up actually on the grounds of the hospital, and I thought everybody did until I found out later it wasn't true. I've been involved in this my entire life. But, here's the thing for you parents out there, remember what life was like before you had a child with a disability, and you probably can't. But you are an entirely different person than you are today. So here's the other component that I always try to include is a professional care manager here. And if you look at some of my materials, we'll often add that which would be a care manager who goes out and assesses the needs and really is ideally is an expert in autism and will come up with what's called a distribution plan and say, this is what we think Junior needs for this year. And then we can use the different tools to get those things to Junior here. And usually that's the centerpiece of the plan I want that's ideal. Just keep this in mind. Even if you're looking at turning this over to a child, you have learned so much. You are an advocate. You are so far advanced at this point, even though the stuff is so confusing. And to turn this over to somebody who either doesn't have your skill set or doesn't understand these rules is a recipe for disaster. I hope that wasn't too convoluted, but.
So here's the last question, which is my own question.
Yeah.
It is, as we know, a crazy time. And disability benefits in general are a shit show. And even more now during COVID, and funding is being cut to all types of programs and benefits for our children or loved ones. Can you give us some constructive advocacy suggestions for us that we can do to make sure that there's actually going to be benefits for our children later?
I'll tell you what's going on. And for those of you that are watching the video, we're doing this in mid-August 2020. Well, we don't know if it's the middle of the COVID pandemic or not. I don't know about you guys. I've had just about enough. This is not going to end soon. Okay. So there's two things that are going on right now. One is because of deficits, budget deficits here. We're looking at a lot of challenges, not only just to benefits themselves, but also to the Social Security Administration itself here and the fund and all that. And I think the technical term is, you're right, it's been a shit show and it's only getting worse. And so that's getting to be a bigger and bigger issue. The other thing on the other side is, and this is not just in California, we're propping it up a lot of our direct service provider agencies right now because it isn't business as usual. And of course, you have to look at not only the safety of the person with the disability, but the workers and all that. And right now, we're propping that up with funding that may end at the end of this month here. And the problem that you run into with that is that we've already seen these provider programs shutting down or diminishing their services And the problem with it is that if they start shutting down, you can't just turn around when the pandemic is open, pull them off the shelf and say, hey, let's just go back to this. When they're gone here. And it took 50 years to build this system up. And we can see, the problem with that. I know there's advocacy fatigue. I know there's times I think if I have to write one more letter or send one more email to my legislator, I'm going to go out of my mind. But the answer is get over it here. And this is where working with NCSA here, who is very connected with other programs, is so important. There's a lot of services, and there's some critical things going on in California, but California is not unique. There's some critical services that are in danger of being cut. And the only reason that we have the services we have is because of like you. It's not because they want to help those poor disabled people get a life here. It's because some of you people might be a pain in the ass. It's real possible here, and you need to dust off the pain in the ass part of this, and you need to demand that. There was a promise made to shut down the institutions in favor of sustainable community services. There was this promise made, and they need to keep the promise, no matter who is in office and that kind of thing. The only hope, believe me, they don't want to hear a bunch of whiny attorneys testifying. They don't even really want to hear from the disability organizations. They want to hear from you. They want to hear your stories. And here's the other thing, just dealing with COVID here, is a lot of what this has really shown is that our service systems for persons with disabilities has been shaky for years and years. And this has just highlighted a problem we've already known. We should really look beyond just trying to salvage what we can. We should really use this as a time to go back to that this is an important population, this is a vulnerable population, and our direct service providers that provide services for these folks, they deserve a living wage. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
I can't think of anything more honorable than providing direct services for persons with disabilities. And they require our assistance. Otherwise, we're going to watch this collapse. And I fear in California, we watched our mental health system collapse. There were 2 Lanternman systems originally. That collapsed completely here. I fear that I'm watching that going on with folks with IDD, and that would be a tragedy. So, dust off your advocacy pants and get ready, because we really need to advocate at all levels. What do you think, Beta?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm ready to go toe to toe.
Okay.
So, thank you so much, Steve. I mean, we really appreciate it. I've known you for a long time. You've always been a great resource. We had dozens and dozens of questions that we couldn't get to. We'll send out Amy's email so they can email Amy directly, and we could attempt to see if they can get their questions answered, or you can point them in the right direction. Again, this is all recorded, so you will all get a copy of this, and you can share it with your friends. Again, thank you so much, and let's stick in there, guys. What are we gonna do? This alone together sounds corny, but it's kind of true. All right, so take care, everybody. Bye.